Hello, everyone. Tonight we got Kyle, and he's going to teach us how to set up and program moving heads so that they can be a great addition to our show. Thank you, Kyle, and take it away.
Hi, everyone. Kyle here from BF Light Shows. I'm going to go over moving heads. I'm going to cover both the old way and the new way. I'm going to cover a few different things, how to set them up, how the model works, how the new advanced model works, how to set them up in a group setting, as well as how the new moving head effect works. I'm going to go over some of the caveats with the actual model and then the sequencer, as well as some tips and tricks on importing from various vendors, because some of us do it differently. All right. So the first thing you're going to do is you can come up to this create a new DMX effect in your layout, and then you're going to select moving head advanced. If you are getting moving heads from Meadows Designs, your Pixel Store, Magical Light Shows, Lauren Christmas Lighting, or any of the vendors like in this hobby, they will probably have the model for you, so you won't have to manually create this. We have them on our website for free for the most popular ones. But if you do need to create it, you can just go to this DMX menu and then drop this effect or this model in here. And once you have the model drawn, you want to give it a name. This is just for your reference, more or less. And then under this DMX Moving Head Advanced dropdown, it's going to have a fixture number. Your first moving head should be fixture number 1. And then it's going to ask you for the number of channels you have. The number of channels can either be found on your moving head on the model and the little LCD screen or in your manual. Next up, you are going to open the pan motor option, and then you can define the course that is going to be the larger increments of pan. There's also going to be a channel fine for pan. That is going to allow you to have smaller increments so you get a little more precise control over the pan motor. Your pan motor is your X and X axis. Tilt is going to be your Y axis. And then in your manual, it should tell you the range of motion. Every moving head that I have seen is 540 degrees. Your orient to 0, that is going to be how you physically install the moving head on your system in your yard or on your roof or wherever you're installing it. Mine move clockwise. So I set mine up facing to the left. If you have a counterclockwise moving head, I would recommend facing the right. But if you wanted it to face forward, you would just change this number, and basically however you change this number will dictate which way it's actually facing when you go to install it. This orient forward is part of Gill's new effect. And what you want to do with this is you are defining how many degrees the moving head needs to rotate in order to be pointing over your crowd. So you want to basically think of this as you're standing on the sidewalk facing your house. How many degrees does the moving head need to rotate in order to face over the crowd? If it's starting directly facing forward, you could leave that at 0 or do 360. If it's facing to either the left or to the right, it should be 270 degrees. The slew limit right here in degrees per second, that is going to show you in xLights your moving head speed. That is going to basically dictate in your xLights preview how fast your moving head moves. If you leave that at 0, it's going to basically instantaneously go from position to position, which is not realistic. So you want to set that as realistic as possible. That's going to be dependent on your moving head model. Reverse, what that is going to do is that is going to reverse the direction by default. It's going to move clockwise. If you have an outdoor unit, most of those move counterclockwise by default. So you would just want to check this reverse option. Upside down is if you are mounting the moving head upside down. on like a truss at like a concert or something like that. I think most of us use them right side up, so probably don't need that for most of us. Next up, we have tilt. Again, we have a coarse fine and a a channel coarse and a channel fine. And then most of these have a range of motion of between 250 and 270 degrees. The orient to 0 is going to be how the moving head sits at rest. Mine kind of angled down, so mine's about 38 degrees. You can see behind me it's pointing down right now. And then orient up, that is going to be pointing straight up in the sky. So you can play with that. They're all typically around 127, 128, 129, right in that range. And then again, you have a slew limit, which is going to show the xLights preview of how fast it can actually move. Again, you have the option to reverse or upside down. I don't think there would really be a reason to use reverse, but upside down if you mount it upside down on a truss system. The next option, we have color properties. So you can choose color wheel or RGBW. In your manual, it should tell you what the different values are to get different colors. It doesn't tell you what the actual colors are. It'll just say color 1, color 2, color 3, and you'll have to manually go through and figure out which value equals which color or download the model from whatever vendor you're getting it from. Next up, we have dimmer. That will be in your manual, simple option there. And then shutter, kind of the same thing, but we do have this shutter open threshold and shutter on value. That's basically just to get this beam to show inside xLights. You're going to want to have your shutter on basically for all your sequences. And then beam property basically just lets you show how the preview is going to show the actual beam itself. And then this base mesh, yoke, and head mesh are basically just the rendering of the model itself. So there is a new version. This is still showing the old one, even though it's the new moving head advanced model. The graphics have changed slightly. So you can update those if you want. But that's everything for the actual model itself. The next thing I want to go over real quick is how to set these up in a group for the new moving head effect. And this is super easy. You're going to click on your first moving head, click on your last moving head and hold the shift key. That will select all of your moving heads. Right click, and then you're going to create a group from selections. And I just call this MH all. So now we have an actual group for all of the moving heads, and that'll be useful in just a little bit. I did just make this layout right before this class, so let me just double check. Okay, so I did assign all the moving head fixtures the correct number. If you forget to do this, the moving head effect in the sequencer won't give you all of the options you're going to need. So I'll go over that a little bit more shortly. Most of the sequencers are still using the old method, so I'm going to show how to set that up real quick. So to get the old method of grouping moving heads set up, you basically grab a single line of pixels and you are going to drag that out. And then you can give this a name. The most common groups that you're going to want to use are MH dimmers, color, pan, shutter, and tilt. Focus and frost, prism, rotation, and gobos are all options as well, but those are less commonly programmed from the sequence vendors. So you can create those, but you may not use them as often. And then once you have your string set up and it has its name, you're going to set the number of strings to the number of moving heads you have. So if you have 2 moving heads, the number of strings would be 2. If you have 4, it would be 4. If you have 8, it would be 8. And then you are going to use 1 light per string. And then under this controller tab, you're going to select the drop down and click Use Start Channel. After you change this to Use Start Channel, you're going to want to check this individual Start Channel box right here. And then under string 1, that is going to be moving head number 1. You're going to click in this option, click the 3 dots. That's going to open this dialog box here. You're going to select Start of Model. You're going to go in your list and find your first moving head. And then the start channel that you're going to want to use is the channel that corresponds with whatever you're trying to program. In this case, I'm programming dimmers, which uses channel 3 for the dimmers. So we want the start channel to be 3. We'll say OK. And then you're going to repeat that process for all of your moving heads. So it will say at moving head -1 colon number 3 at moving head -2 colon 3. And notice that all of these are using channel 3 because all 8 of these are the same moving head with all the same channel numbers. If you are using different manufacturer moving heads and you have maybe 2 of one brand, 2 of another brand, these channels can be different. You just want to refer to your manual to have that set up correctly. And then you're going to repeat that process for color, dimmer, pan, shutters, and tilt. The most critical portion of this is down here at the bottom. You want to go to string properties, and under string type, you want this set to single color. By default, it will be RGB nodes. And if you leave it at RGB nodes, it will not work. So the moving heads will not respond or do what you're trying to do. So make sure that you go in and actually set all of these to string type single color. After you have all of this all set up, you can go over to your controller, click on the controller and go to visualize. And then you are going to drag the moving heads onto one of your serial ports. After you have all of them on your serial ports, you'll notice that my particular moving heads are 16 channels. This little square bracket, number 1, indicates that the first moving head in this chain uses DMX address number 1. The moving head number 2 uses 17. If you need to change that, you can come in here and you can either set the channel or set channel and chain. If you need to restart it, maybe you had a different machine daisy chained in here, you can basically just right click on that and you can set this to whatever DMX address you want it to start with. And then on the actual moving head itself, you need to make sure that your first fixture has the corresponding number right here. So it could be 1, could be 17, 33, 5, whatever you're starting with, they just need to match. Otherwise, your channel counts will be wrong and xLights won't do what you're expecting it to with the moving heads. So number 8 is 113. You're basically just adding 16 to each one of these for these moving heads. If you have a different number of channels for your moving head, maybe they're 14 or 18, these numbers would just change according to your moving head. Notice that the groups or the strings that we set up here are not getting assigned to the controller. Those are sharing overlapping channel numbers because of the way we set them up, but they don't actually get assigned to a controller. So just leave those unassigned and everything will still work. And then you're going to upload your output to your controller. Once you have done that, you should be able to come over to your sequencer. All right, so everyone hopefully can see that. So in the sequencer, we have moving head 1 through 8. The way I typically program sequences, I do them on the group level or on the node. I don't do them on the actual fixture themselves. Some vendors do it on the actual fixture itself, in which case, if you have a different style moving head, you'll have to go into this remap channels option in order to remap it for your branded moving head. Not a huge deal. Each way works. I find that to be a little harder for the user, so that's the reason we don't do that. So to get these things to turn on and to start working, we'll take an on effect and we'll throw that on the shutter. And then if you double click on any of these strings that are simulating groups, if you double click on it, it'll drop down and you'll see there's an option for strand 1. If you double click again, it will give you an option for node 1 through, in my case, node 8. What that is indicating is node 1 is moving head 1, node 8 is moving head 8. So that'll correspond with how many moving heads you have. And then that'll be the same for dimmers, for color if you're using it, and tilt and pan. If for any reason you need to reorder or readjust your render order, you can right click in here and go to Edit Display Elements. So I like to have pan and tilt next to each other and dimmer closer to it. Since I created this MH all group after the sequence was created, it wasn't part of my display elements. So we'll go ahead and add that. And then from here, if we wanted to start getting some effects on here, we have a couple different options. We can grab a DMX effect and we could throw it on either the pan group up here or the pan string. And channel 1 would be moving head 1, channel 8 would be moving head 8. You can see now it is starting to rotate and do a circle here. So now they are both, moving head 1 and moving head 2 are starting to rotate and move around. The reason I don't do it on the group level here is if you have a different number of moving heads, you have to go and remap channels again, and it's just a little bit more tedious. So the way I like to do these is I will come in, I will have this expanded, and then I will drop that effect on this node level here. And once we get a little deeper into this and I show you some of the sequencing, I'll go over actually importing a sequence, and we'll go from 8 to 4. I'll show you some examples from different vendors and what kind of adjustments you need to make to get them to line up for your show. But so if we come here and we drop a few of these down, so now they are all spinning. Typically speaking, you wouldn't want to do a ramp from like 0 to 255. That would be a 540-degree rotation. If you wanted to do like a full pan left to a full pan right type of thing, typically speaking, that is 180 degrees. To figure out what the numbers for DMX are going to be for that, some quick calculations are 43 in DMX equals about 90 degrees for moving heads. So if you're trying to do 180 degrees far left to far right, it would be 86. So we could take 86 and do 172, and that is going to be a full left to full right pan. Now, the way moving heads work is they will need time to get into position. They won't just instantaneously do that flip from 0 to 86 or to 172. So you need to come in and add a DMX effect to get your moving head into position prior to that effect start. And depending on which brand moving heads you have, whether they're outdoor, indoor, all that type of stuff, is going to kind of determine how long it's going to take ahead of time in order to get into position. Your standard outdoor moving heads are going to take longer than the indoor ones. The new moving head that Miner just released yesterday, a couple days ago, earlier this week, those are a significant improvement in speed, but there is still kind of a delay. No matter which brand you go with, there is still going to be a delay. So just keep that in mind. If you're sequencing them yourself, you need to give it time in order for these to get into position. So now that we've given this about a second or so to get into position, you can see that they start to rotate. In most cases, I found giving them about a second and a half to 2 seconds is enough time to get them into position. So the indoor moving heads, like the one I have behind me, it doesn't take 2 seconds to get into position. That's one of the fastest moving heads on the market right now. But we sequence ours to be at a slower speed because most people aren't using the indoor moving heads. They're using the outdoor ones, which are going to be slower. So we build in that lead time to get all of the different brand moving heads into position in time. And then depending on how long the effect is, will kind of dictate how fast the actual moving head is rotating. So if we drag this effect out longer, you can see now they are moving a lot slower. And if I turn output to lights on, you can see now it is spinning behind me. So looks like because of the camera, it's reversed, but it's following what xLights is telling it to do. It's doing that 180-degree rotation. To get a little more creative with things, if you wanted to get the lights to start doing kind of like a dancing to the beat, you could, we'll keep the same ramp we just had here. In the dimmers portion, you can get kind of creative with a handful of different effects. Just 1 second to get this out of the way. So you could come in here and you could do bars, which right now is not very exciting. But if we change this to horizontal expand and we use white and black, so now you can see we're getting a few more interesting effects with this. Now you can see they're kind of fanning out. We did like a left, you could do a left, you could do a right, and if you have the number of nodes expanded, you can actually see which moving head is getting the on or the trigger for the dimmer to actually be turned on. You can play with quite a few different things. You can use the on effect, you could use color wash, bars, shockwave, single strand. You can really get creative with the different effects up here. If you wanted to do like a bounce left and right, now we can go back and forth. If we are trying to do something where we need to see more than one moving head at a time, we can adjust the chase size. So now you can see they are overlapping and we're getting about 3 at a time. If you want it to be almost all of them, you could change to something like 80, and now almost all of them are on at the same time. You could do dual chase. If you're doing dual chase, you want a smaller chase size, but now they're basically kind of crisscrossing. So you can get quite a few different effects if you start playing with single strand or shockwave, bars, twinkle. Really, most of the effects work in here. So adding like a twinkle effect kind of gives you like a random pattern. So depending on what you're trying to do, you can get some really nice effects with these. Notice that those were all placed on the actual dimmer group itself instead of the strands or instead of the nodes themselves. if you wanted to do the node itself, I found the best effect to use for that is the on effect. And you could either do like a start intensity at 100 and an end intensity at 0, so it kind of ramps off, or you could do something like a 0 up to 100 and then back down. And this will basically allow the moving head to kind of come on slowly. It'll reach its full intensity and then it will come down. Another option you have is if you have the start intensity and end intensity both at 100. In the color panel, let's move this over. You can come down over to brightness and you can click on the ramp here. And you could do something like a ramp up and down. And this will basically create the same effect. So the moving head, I think that was sparkle. So doing that will basically have the moving head turn on and then turn off. All right. And then I'm going to go over the new moving head effect and how that works. And then I will go into actually importing and then the adjustments that you need. Before I jump into the new moving head effect, does anyone have any questions? I know I've covered quite a bit of ground quickly. Just Jackie asking what a moving head is? All
I
right.
think they explained it. They explained it.
Perfect. Feel like we're going to have some EFL moving head choro props coming soon. All right, so the new moving head effect, the effects go in alphabetical order, so it is just after the morph effect and before the music effect. And then you can drop that effect onto your moving head all group. And depending on how long this effect is going to dictate how fast or slow the moving head is doing whatever it is programmed to do. Over here in the effect settings, you'll have your fixtures up at the top. Fixtures are your actual moving heads. So fixture 1 is moving head 1, fixture 8 is moving head 8. And you can pick all of these. You could pick just one of them, odds, evens, basically whatever you want to do. And this effect kind of works like the sketch effect where it will remember its history. So if you select all and you come down and you grab this little cursor here, this is going to kind of create where you want the moving heads to face. And once this is set up correctly, the center point is 0, 0, and that is going to get all of your moving heads to face over your crowd and straight in the sky. And that is where that orient to 0 comes in the pan and the tilt option. So when we were over here in the layout and we had to go into orient forward, orient 0 for pan and tilt, that is why we had to do that, is because this new effect is doing all of the math in order to get to the position it needs to be. So instead of using DMX and using values like 128 or 43, xLights is doing all of that in the background. And as sequencers, we can just click on this little graph here. Here would be, facing a little bit to the left and up, over to the right. And you could get a pan left to pan right very quickly by doing like a negative 45 to 45. So you can see They are pointed at a 45-degree angle up, and they are rotating from left to right. If you wanted it to move slower, basically just drag that effect out longer. If maybe those are pointing too high or something, you could come down. We could make it, say, 90 degrees here. And you can see now they are moving left to right, but they are moving in a slower capacity. So this new idea and new method of programming them allows all of the different vendors and different manufacturers of moving heads to kind of have a uniform method of programming them. As you saw, as I clicked on that, by default, because I clicked off of it and clicked back on, it unselected all 8 moving heads. But if you click on status, this is going to give you your detailed history of what you programmed in and what the moving heads are supposed to be doing. If you click on something and you program it, or the vendor you're getting sequences from programmed it, and it's not working or it's not doing what you want it to do, you can come down here and just click this reset to default. It will basically clear out all of its history, and then you can start over. So you'll have to click off and then click on the effect again. So everything is selected. They are all programmed pointing into the sky now. This little grid here, like I said, this is going to be kind of your 0, 0. It's going to be pointing straight and then pointing straight up. Coming down on the screen is going to angle the moving heads down towards your crowd. So right here is 90 degrees. If you need to point it down like at the sidewalk or something, you could go to closer to 135 degrees. You got to be careful if you break that 90-degree plane though. Once you start going below that threshold, you might be hitting your neighbor's windows. If you're on a street, you may be shining into cars' windows while they're driving and potentially blinding people. So I don't recommend going below 90 unless you know exactly what you're doing and you're not crossing that threshold. What I would do if I wanted to shine something on the sidewalk or down this low is I would have the lights turned off, so the dimmer would not be on, drop the moving heads all the way down, then turn the dimmer on. That way it's not going across all the neighbors' houses, across the street. It's basically getting into position, then turning the light on, and then you can do whatever you want, and then turn the dimmer back off and go back up. If you live in the middle of nowhere and you don't have any neighbors or a street to worry about, by all means, you can go up and down and you don't have to worry about it. But for most of us, we'll need that kind of consideration so our neighbors aren't super upset. This fan pan option here is another new part of this model. And what it does is it allows you to orientate a quick kind of fan pattern. So all of the moving heads are going to fan out, and this is going to be 10 degrees from each other. And it's going to do all that math in the background without you having to do anything. So you're just going to adjust this. If you want it to stick out farther, you want it to start doing like a circle. Moving head 4 and 5 is basically your center point because we're using 8 moving heads. 35 degrees is going to be this moving head. It's going to add another 35 degrees here and another 35 degrees here. So this one's going to be 140 degrees or so different than this moving head in the middle here. So you don't have to go very far with this to get good results. If we come over here and we throw an effect on the on, so you can see they are fanning out here. And if you wanted to adjust your tilt, because I clicked off of it, you have to select all of them again. And then you could adjust your tilt to point either lower or higher. if you start throwing different ramp values on these kinds of things, you can get some pretty cool effects. So let's do 45. So now you see it's going down, going back up. But we mentioned that we may have neighbors that we have to worry about. So we may want to adjust these numbers. Maybe we do 90, 180, which would be fully behind the house. And this is kind of what I mean with some of the different, I don't want to call them bugs, but the little nuances with this new effect that can be kind of problematic when we're trying to program them. So now they're going up and down in this kind of fan pattern. And you can throw ramps on any one of these. So if you wanted it to slowly start to fan out, maybe we have let's do 60 so we can see these. So you have a kind of a fan out and a fan back in. You know, Disney does these kinds of effects a lot with their castle show. You can also do it with tilt. So we could do a fan option with tilt here. So you can see, throw this in 3D real quick. So you can see now with this fan tilt, they are basically doing the same fanning motion, but on the tilt axis. So again, using 34 degrees is going to be too much. So you want to be careful with how much of a degree fan you want to use. If you did something like 10, you have kind of a cool effect here. And if you had that on like a ramp, you know, you could make them go back and forth and get some really cool effects with that. If you threw a cycle count on it, basically it's going to start to go up and then go down. And it's basically going to allow you to create patterns quickly as opposed to the old method with DMX where you'd have to do it either on the group one at a time and do all that math and all those value curves. Right here, you can do things just a little bit easier. So we'll go back in here and you can see everything is saved. So every time you add something or every time you do something new, originally it was pan 0, 0, tilt 60, then pan offset, then tilt offset, and then the number of cycles that we turned on. So it's basically just gonna always keep that running list. And if you need to clear something out, just reset the 2 defaults. And when you click back on the effect, everything's cleared out. So they have added the dimmer functionality to the moving heads. I've had quite a few issues trying to actually use the dimmer and control portion with the color wheel, trying to use the effect. So for now, I would still recommend using the group for M8 shutters and dimmers while using the new moving head effect until those are kind of worked out. And then pathing allows you to kind of use the sketch effect brains, or the system that sketch effect uses, where you can come in here and you can basically draw a shape in order to create a pattern that you want the moving head to follow. So if you wanted to create kind of like a hexagon look, so now the moving head effect here will basically start to follow this pattern. And if you wanted to create a time offset, you could do something like this. And basically what the time offset will do is moving head 1 will start this motion here. And once the moving head 1 starts moving after 12, and I don't think these are in actual seconds. I'm not sure what the actual measurement is here, but after 12, moving head 2 will start to move, and then moving head 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, however many you have. So you can get some additional cool patterns with that. You can create circles or squares, diamonds, basically whatever shape you can imagine. And then you also have the option to save it as a preset. So one cool thing about doing this is if you turn this into like a circle, then you'd have an option for that to basically create like a searchlight pattern. Lots of people get moving heads and they try to use sine waves and cosines and stuff to try to create that pattern in the old method. This new method is a lot easier in order to create those kinds of effects. Control, like I said, I've run into a handful of issues with this, but you have the option. You can come in here and go to color wheel, and you can pick what color you want the moving head beam to be. Most of the colors don't show up very well outside. Depends on it, what kind of environment you're in, if you have lots of particles in the air. If you're doing it for Halloween and you have smoke machines and fog machines, then you can use colors and they'll show up a lot better. If you're aiming the moving heads like at the ground or off a building or into a tree or things like that, the colors will show up, but it's really hard to get a beam with color, especially red. Red is the hardest one to get. So that's a little bit about the new moving head effect. The status is really kind of the thing you want to pay most attention to. You'll just come in here, you'll see what you defined the moving head to do. If it's not doing something you want, you can go ahead and click that reset to defaults to clear everything out. And then, as I mentioned before, you can either select this all option, you could select none, you could select evens. So we'll give you just a quick demo if I wanted them to do different things, but we're in the same effect. So right now we have all of the evens selected. We'll come over to position and we will throw this ramp value on the evens. We can click off of the effect, click back onto the effect, click on the odds, and we'll reverse the curve for this. So now the odds are doing one motion, the evens are doing a different motion, even though it is one effect in one layer instead of 8 different effects for each 8 individual moving heads. So you get a lot of flexibility with this. There, like I said, there's just a few nuances and some things that you have to get used to with order of operations and things because of the status. So originally it sets, 1, 3, 5, and 7, then 2, 4, 6, and 8. So as long as you remember the order of operations and how to program these, then this effect and this new model really give a lot more functionality to what you can achieve with moving heads and how much time it takes to program them. Come down here, clear that out. So one of the things that this new moving head effect does is it takes aim to try to alleviate all the different vendors that use different moving head systems, whether or not their home points are the same, how your home points may be different, and all of that. If until all the vendors start using this new method, there's still going to be some issues using the old method. So I have a few tips and solutions on how to map different sequence vendors moving heads to your layout. So let me go over that real quick. So in this one, you can see they are facing all to the right, but let's change that real quick. So if, for example, you had yours facing, we'll say the front of the house. All right, so change these real quick. So I believe Pixel Perfect Sequences and Pixel Pro Displays both use the orient forward as their home points. So if you're getting sequences from them and you set yours up to the front, you won't need to make any adjustments. But if you set yours up to the side and theirs are oriented forward, you'll need to make some adjustments. If yours are oriented forward and the vendor you get sets them to the side, you'll need to make some adjustments. So just as an example, let's say either PPD or PPS is your go-to sequence vendor. So you followed their method and you orientated your moving heads facing forward. And then you come across a sequence that you like from somebody that has them mounted to the side. So we would come in here, and this is how the sequence, if you get from us, is going to pop up. So you have your MH dimmers, and you'll have strand 1 option, as well as all of the nodes. And you're basically just going to drag these over. If you are using 4 moving heads and the vendor that you are getting them from use 8, what I would recommend is find the middle, basically, whether it is 4, 6, 8, however many it is, figure out what that middle is, and then you want their middle to align with your middle. So in my case, that's 4 and 5. So if you only have 4 of them, you would take my number 4 and make that your number 2, my number 5, make that your number 3. That way they are still going to be the center points. I'm just going to click auto map to map all these over. But basically you would just map those over 1 to 1 if you have them. And then we'll click OK. We'll click render. Since this is being recorded, I'm going to turn the audio off. Well, would help if I change that real quick. So now when we go to play this, you can see all of the moving heads are facing to the side. And that's because they are using a different starting point or home point than you are. So how do you go about fixing that? So a little earlier, I mentioned that if you need to make a quick 90-degree adjustment, it is going to be a pan 43 is basically going to be the value you need to adjust. So what you can do here is we can go ahead and add a layer here. And you can do this in channel remapping too, but I find it easier to use it on the group level here. So we need to subtract 43 because we need to rotate this 43. And then in here, we can go to this normal drop down here and we can click subtractive. And you can see now they are all facing behind the house. So from here, we can go down to the tilt. Go ahead and drop an effect on that. We are going to set all of these at 255. And then after you do that, you'll want to select all of the node level effects. You're going to change those to additive. And then once this is done rendering, they should be facing the correct direction. So I apologize. I had the subtract backwards for pan and tilt. So subtractive on tilt and additive for pan. But that will basically get them to face the correct direction, and you won't have to make any other adjustments beyond that. So just a real quick way in order to get the 90-degree difference between the pointing forward or pointing to the side orientation corrected for your layout. If you have them pointing directly forward, the way moving heads work, there's a stopper motor in them, so they can't actually spin all the way around. They can only start spinning one direction. So immediately they can either go left or they can't go right, one of the two, depending on which orientation they start to spin in. So I would recommend setting them to one of the sides. If you are using the counterclockwise moving heads facing to the right, if you're using clockwise moving heads facing to the left, that'll give you your widest range of motion over the crowd. So there are those. I know we can do up to an hour and a half. So I wanted to cover this for about the first hour and then make sure I had plenty of time to answer questions and things like that. So does anyone have any questions?
Is there a reason you're using all red color for this?
I don't particularly have a dedicated reason. The reason is defined over here. So when you come and you set the string properties to whatever color it is, that's basically dictating what your color is. You could make each one of these groups a different color. You could make it blue or green or red or whatever. By default, it does red, and I just left it as red. So I don't really have a reason for why I use red other than that's just the default. But you could use whatever color you want. You just have to set the string property.
Anybody else have any questions? I'm not seeing any in chat either. So Kyle, you must have done a
All
great
right.
job, and everybody can do this next week.
All right, there's going to be a test. No, I'm just kidding. All right, well, then a couple other.
You kid, Kyle, but I think we should put a quiz question in here. What can we have a secret code word so that when somebody comes in the Zoom room, to make sure that they watch this video, they have to know the code word to prove that they've watched the whole video.
That's it.
So the secret code word is code word.
You're in charge of managing that.
There you go. No, honestly, people come into the Zoom room and it is these basic principles that they're just not grasping sometimes, or they're just not putting in the time to learn them.
Yeah,
but
I will say one of probably the biggest thing that I see when people send me layouts and their sequences aren't working is their groups aren't set up with that single color under string properties. They left it as RGB nodes and nothing works. And then as soon as you change that and render the sequence again, everything's working. So that's really the biggest thing I see. I guess a couple other real quick things. The lamp-based moving heads require a lamp on sequence. That's real simple. You'll just look at your manual and whatever your manual says as your reset, you're going to basically drop a DMX effect onto whatever moving head you're trying to turn on or all of them. Since I have it behind me, I'll go ahead and demo this. Yeah, Scott, you're a developer. You get them for free anyways. So lamp on. These, they are 105. That would help if you could see the. All right, well, I will try and troubleshoot that and give a quick demo if anyone wants it. But basically you will come in and go under your lamp channel. And then in your manual, it will tell you what your lamp on or lamp off option's going to be. Generally, it has to be in that position for about 5 to 10 seconds. So once you do that, you'll fire up your moving heads, you'll power them up, then lamp them all on. And then I would recommend doing that roughly 10 minutes or so prior to your show starting. And then that way they will start to get to brightness. Once they are at brightness, then you can go ahead and run your show. And then at the end of the night, you'll do the lamp off sequence for all of them. And then about 10 minutes after they have been lamped off, you can go ahead and disconnect them from power. The way I do mine, they are just on a smart outlet. So that kicks on. A couple minutes after it kicks on, the lamp on sequence starts. That's about 15 minutes prior to my show starting. Show ends, lamp off sequence. 10, 15 minutes later, they power off. And then that part just repeats every day that the show is running. So, but anyways, hopefully that was helpful. I'll troubleshoot this for a second and hang out if anyone else comes up with any questions. But thanks everyone for watching. Hopefully it was helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me either on Facebook or by email at info@bflightshows.com.
Kyle, I want to say thank you for this. It's a great presentation. We'll
Thank
see
you.
how many people remember it.